the results of when you strip out all sugar, not sweeteners, because the body's response is so fast in a beneficial way. That for me is the reason why I am doubtful about the current policies fundamentally working, because I do think if you take a little bit here and you take a little bit there, and I don't think there's a big enough dramatic difference to make those big changes that public health want to see, as in the reduction in obesity, the reduction in diabetes.
Hello and welcome back to the Sugar-Free Summit. Really excited about today's session where we're going to be discussing government policy and whether enough is being done. And I'm joined by my special guest, Harriet Burt from Action on Sugar and Hannah Sutter from the Natural Ketosis Company. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and enjoy today's session.
ZUKR, deliciously guilt-free.
Hi everyone, my name's Nabila Fowles-Gutierrez and I'm one of the co-founders of ZUKR, and I'm so excited to be with you today, joined by my guests, and we're going to be discussing sugar in government policy. Is enough being done? We are incredibly excited to bring this event to you, to be able to have really in-depth discussions on where we are with sugar consumption in the UK and perhaps even abroad, and to bring some of the most important people in our country that are having these important discussions and bring them to you for us to be able to inform you and educate you and help you to have those discussions at home together. So today I'm joined by Hannah Sutter. Hi Hannah.
Hi.
Hi, and Hattie Burt. So I'm going to hand over to you, Hannah, first, so you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Hannah Sutter, founder of Natural Ketosis and Fat and Keto Care Foods, specialise in making natural low-carb foods without obviously using sugar. So that's what I do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction. And Hattie, over to you.
Hi, I'm Hattie Burt. I work at Action on Sugar. I'm a Policy and Communications Officer there, and we work to improve public health by removing the excess sugar and also salt and saturated fat from processed foods.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming today. A little bit of background about myself. I'm the co-founder of ZUKR, but I'm also have a background in research and public health and also midwifery. And so very passionate about, health promotion and health education. And it's such a privilege and a pleasure to be able to be part of an event that is really helping us all to highlight the importance of sugar in consumption in our diets, and looking at ways and having discussions about how that's affecting us, and perhaps how we can improve our well-being, our diets and our health by reducing sugar. So you both know, government policy at the moment, obviously, we only need a pair of eyes to see what is happening to our nation population and what's happened, particularly throughout the pandemic and after the pandemic. So Hattie, first of all, let's start with you. What do you think, the government has done in policy that has been working with sugar reduction? Have any of the policies that governments over the last decade or two have come up that have worked in terms of sugar reduction? What do you think?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The government sugar reduction programme at the minute is a voluntary programme. It was started in 2016 and it challenged food manufacturers to reduce the amount of sugar in their products sold by 20%. The last progress report, which was in 2019, showed that just 3% reduction had been achieved, which is kind of woeful progress over 3 years. And the final report on that is due to come out last autumn, still hasn't come out. We've been told it will come out in due course, which doesn't sound particularly encouraging. So I think what we've seen with that, we do surveys of different food categories. So we've looked at, as part of the Food Foundation's Broken Plate report, we've looked at yogurts and breakfast cereals, and we've seen there that progress has been really slow on that voluntary sugar reduction programme. One policy that has been more effective at reducing sugar consumption, and which is always cited as a kind of smart policy, has been the soft drinks industry levy, where we've seen huge amounts of sugar reduced from soft drinks. The difference there is that in a liquid, it's very easy to reduce sugar and replace it with a sweetener, which is, it's not our first and foremost our first and foremost aim would be to reduce overall sweetness, but it has reduced sugar sales and with no impact on company profits, which is always sort of cited as a reason why we shouldn't be making progress. But yeah, overall, the sugar program, the voluntary program, isn't working at the minute. I think we'll probably come on to it, but one policy that has sort of made it through the chaos, the political chaos of the last couple of years, is the restrictions on the promotion of these high fat, high sugar, high salt products in those sort of top locations in retail. So store entrances, aisles, checkouts. So those restrictions are coming in October to mean that those unhealthy products can no longer be the sort of first thing you see as you enter a shop. And instead, what we will be seeing is healthier products. This is a public health issue. It's not an issue of individual choice. It's kind of an illusion that we can choose what we eat. It's these big retailers that are putting food in the supermarkets. It's the big manufacturers that are choosing the recipes of the products. So there's an element there of, you don't have pester power from children as you go to the checkout. But the big thing that we're hoping to see is that food manufacturers are then incentivized to change their recipes to reduce the sugar in them, to talk about sugar, but reduce salt and saturated fat, so that those products are just that little bit healthier. And obviously on an individual level, that might not make, it's the cumulative effect across the millions of people in the UK that we're going to see the benefits of that. So yeah, in summary, I'd say an ineffective voluntary program. We're calling for mandatory sugar targets to really, the food industry have kind of proved that they're not interested in reducing sugar consumption, at least in the main. So that's why we'd be calling for these mandatory sugar targets.
Thank you, Hattie. Yeah, I think that's a very sobering picture that you paint there. Hannah, what do you think about what's happening with the nation's health? I know you're very passionate. Tell us a little bit.
I think the nation's health has been downward since the 80s. So I think we're just on a general trajectory in one direction. My personal view is it started when we were told to remove saturated fats. So obesity in the UK, the growth in obesity absolutely correlates with the reduction of saturated fats in our food. So we've been on this trajectory since the late 70s. I would be delighted if the sugar tax was brought in across the board and that it made a difference. My expectation from understanding human metabolism and the way the body does actually operate is that we will not see a reduction of obesity with any amount of taxing on sugar. So I'm afraid I'm no problem with it. It doesn't affect me and my business, and I'm certainly no fan of sugar. But unfortunately, I don't believe it will have the effect that the public health bodies want it to have, which is sad, but that's the way I see it, unfortunately.
So tell us a little bit more about what makes you passionate about sugar reduction, because we're sitting on slightly different camps in terms of saturated fat. So Hattie, you are part.
I'm just,
and it's great to see that. So tell us, Hannah, in terms of tell us, if you had a magic wand, what would it look like? What would our nation's diet and health look like if you were able to have control of the policy?
In terms of sugar?
Yes.
In terms of sugar. So yes, of course, I would like to see people seeing sugar as a luxury, which is how originally it would have been used. And so the human body is not really designed to have buckets and buckets and buckets of sweet stuff daily. And that unfortunately does also include fruit. Fruit, this idea that somehow the white powder is fundamentally different from a bag of grapes is deeply misleading to the general public. So what would I like to see? I'd like to see people understand that sugar is a luxury. It's a delightful treat. You have it in things to celebrate events, but it is not part of your daily diet. Whether or not that ever becomes a reality, I doubt it. I'm fairly sanguine about it. I think it's very hard for people to understand that when you have orange juice, for example, even the whole juice, it's not that much different from having a bag of sugar. So we've got an awful long way to go to help people understand that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, what do you think, Hattie? I mean, you've been, how long have you been working with Action on Sugar, and what have you seen in the time that you've been working on this?
Yeah, I've been at Action on Sugar a couple of years now, and I think what you sort of made the point about, we shouldn't be having bucket loads of sugar, and sugar is actually used, you know, the food industry use sugar as a cheap bulking agent to make products sweeter, to sort of reel in a profit, and that's, and hiding behind that is often something that's not a tasty food. But that's why we want to see, sort of, to the reality point, small gradual reductions in sugar. You know, it's not an individual problem. This, you know, if it was a case of coaching kind of individuals or supporting individuals to reduce their sugar intake, that's never going to have the kind of effect on public health that we need. It's not a case of, it's a case of our whole food environment. And I agree with you, Hannah, that the whole world that we're operating in is full of these kind of cheap products that are high in sugar, high in salt. And the reality is that in the next 10 years, you know, they're not going anywhere. So that's why we want to make those everyday foods healthier for everyone, rather than, you know, for the few health conscious consumers or nutritionists going into it, you know, choosing to cook, you know, the whole food meals every night. We're looking to improve just a little bit everyday foods across the whole portfolio of products, and that knock-on impact across the millions of people in the UK or globally does have a cumulative effect, because it's impossible to really.
But it is interesting, the point you make about cumulative effect, because we've been on a calorie reduction strategy since, I think, a focused calorie reduction really got going in the early 90s. This idea that if you could just reduce calories by a little, that would have a significant effect. And actually, of course, so far, there's been, again, little evidence. So it is interesting about how do you go about solving this problem? And I don't know the answer, but we yet haven't seen, with all these strategies being running for nearly 20 years plus, and the only thing that's happened is people have got fatter. You know, there is more exercise done, and in fact, so it's just interesting to understand why we continue to believe that this approach will, in the end, win the game. But maybe you've seen studies that would suggest that will work eventually. Just not long enough.
Have we seen any, Hannah, sorry, Hattie, thank you, Hannah. I think that's really sobering to see that. I mean, I fully agree that, you know, we just need it. I mean, I love research. I'm in research. I've worked with research for many, many years now. And, you know, I'm passionate about getting to understand things. But we only need a pair of eyes to see what's going on, really. We don't need the statistics behind it to just take a look around and see what environment our children are living in, what environment we are all living in. Surrounded, walking into a supermarket now is just sugary foods absolutely everywhere. And, you know, it seems to be that the shopping trolley experience of getting things to cook at home is actually in the minority of the aisles of a supermarket, but the majority of the aisles with cakes and biscuits and sweet treats everywhere. So yeah, Hattie, have you seen, I mean, what success stories can you tell us about? Any countries doing this well, and have they succeeded in reducing obesity and making a difference in sugar consumption by putting in incremental reduction policies?
Well, just to give an example on salt, actually, because salt reduction in terms of changing recipes has actually had some success in the UK. Before we go to other countries, back in the sort of early 2000s, we had these voluntary sugar and salt reduction targets but they were tightly managed, that there was good engagement between kind of government and industry. And we saw significant reductions, sort of 20 to 40% reductions in salt content in some of these sort of key contributors to salt intake. And we've seen so a lot of countries in sort of Central and South America are mandating front of pack warning labels. So it's not quite the same as a mandatory sugar reduction target, but it kind of has the same effect in that food manufacturers want to avoid having, a black warning label that says high in sugar on their product. So they're then incentivized to actually reduce the amount of sugar in their, in whatever it is. And that's getting a lot of traction in South America. Multiple countries are implementing it, and I think we're starting to see some real impacts. But that's the thing, at the minute, with a voluntary program that is just that food companies can just completely choose to ignore, we're never going to see these global companies prioritize public health. It's just not their priority. Their priority is profit. And that's why we need the government to kind of take some leadership and show that it cares about our public health, because ultimately the government should be caring about our public health, even if the likes of these big these big global manufacturers don't. And the food industry kind of had a chance with the voluntary program, and that's why it's time for mandatory targets now.
And so same to you then, Hattie, your magic wand, I'm giving you the magic wand right now today, you're in government, you can make the changes. What would that look like?
Yeah, I think, the mandatory sugar reduction targets would be our first one. And at the minute, the program has a sort of blanket 20% reduction target, which isn't tailored to particular food categories. So in some categories, say yogurts, you can much more easily reduce sugar content. So maybe there the target should be even higher, whereas other products, say chocolate bars, there's less you can do to reduce sugar. Although, the dairy milk, there is a 30% lower dairy milk chocolate bar available. They've not rolled it out to their mainstream products. They've not even included, they've not used that recipe for children-focused chocolate like Easter eggs and advent calendars. So it's possible, but the mandatory sugar targets would be the one. Financial penalties for companies that don't comply. There's got to be some implication. We've seen what happens when there isn't. And then the government to bring in some of their own policies that they have passed but are constantly delaying. So it's great that we're seeing this sort of placement legislation coming in to take these products out, store entrances, etc. But there were due to come in January legislation that would limit the marketing of these unhealthy products aimed at children's health, basically. So advertising before 9 p.m. and advertising online. And the government's just delayed that, so at least a year's delay. And it kind of feels like that's sort of prioritising passes. It's not prioritising public health anyway, it's not prioritising children's health. So some of the government's own policies, which were so close to being implemented, I would say actually get those in. And it sounds like a boring one, but reporting. So at the minute, there's a real lack of transparency around, even for example, what percentage of sales of these big food manufacturers, what proportion of their products are high in sugar. We do surveys where we try and find out this information, but it should be publicly available. Without this sort of information, we're kind of a little bit in the dark. And the government has suggested that they will bring in this reporting, but it's always too slow.
Thank you. No, that's incredibly, for you as somebody working in such an important part of scrutiny, essentially, of our public health policies, it must be incredibly frustrating to be seeing these U-turns at every juncture, when we should be making progress for the government to have made a U-turn at the end of the pandemic, when we, in my role as well as a healthcare professional, having seen the devastation that's happened across the nation with the pandemic, and we all have seen it and witnessed it, that we needed that boost to our health, and that's not been delivered must be incredibly frustrating to you. Hannah, tell us, from your point of view, because I know you are very, very passionate about helping your customers and your clients to make dietary changes. So tell us what you would consider, and I know we may not all agree on this, but that's okay. We're having a grown-up conversation. What would a ideal nutritional, what would an ideal diet look like to you, and what does that look like to you in terms of sugar reduction? Tell us.
Okay, so thank you, and we're not that far apart, don't worry. So in my mind, I only got into this because I did read in the BMJ in 2000 3 studies showing diabetics reversing their diabetes by following a natural, well-managed ketogenic diet. So I start off from the basis that we should eat, the perfect diet for a human is basically the diet that we were evolved to eat, which is primarily based on a combination of protein, the fats that come with that protein, and whatever leafy green vegetables and a bit of fruit you can grab on the way. So when we work with our clients, we start them off, and we are pretty hardcore. You know, we are pushing our customers to go into the state of ketosis, and that is best achieved by certainly not having any sugar at all in any form whatsoever. And we do encourage our customers to, dare I say, avoid anything sweet, even if they're calorie-free or just a natural sweetener. And what we found is it does help people get very quick response. So, you know, if you do a hardcore keto diet, within 24 hours, 48 hours, your body has changed its metabolism. So you get very, very fast results. You know, somebody within 7 days can lose a terrific amount of fat if they're looking for weight loss. Or if they're diabetic, they're immediately no longer, they can see from their blood sugar readings that they're simply not needing to take various drugs to support what they're doing. So that's that for me. When I look at when you're trying to change people, you need to give them very fast results, because humans are deeply impatient and they like to say, well, if I change what I eat, will I get a result? And of course, that is the magic of keto. You get results within a couple of days. So that's what we, I guess, pride ourselves on. We are a little brutal. You know, people ring us up and they say, oh God, am I really going to have tea without a sweetener? And we say, you can take the sweetener, but it will slow you down. So if you can just cope with the misery of not having something sweet for at least a couple of days, then you will start to see pretty fast. But as you say quite rightly, both of you guys I'm chatting with today, not everybody can do that, and not everybody can commit. But that's where we come from. We come from a very much full impact, clean your system out, you'll get faster results, which then motivates you generally to keep going. And that's what that's what we do. But it's not for everybody. I totally understand that. I totally understand.
Yes, I think that's probably where Hattie and I sort of sit more on the same side of the table in terms of public health, which is looking at everybody's health and how we can make those incremental changes. But
one thing I'd like to share with you, we have a business that works for the NHS. I make food for children who are managing epilepsy on the ketogenic diet on prescription. So this is food not available in any way over the counter. Now, what is remarkable about the keto diet, these children will be unable to take drugs for a number of reasons. Within sometimes as short as 24 hours, a child that is put on a very well-structured and medical ketogenic diet. So it's just whole food. There's nothing that you can't do in your own kitchen. But what's really interesting, they could go from maybe fitting 50 times a day to 0 fits, and that's within 24 hours. The only thing I would say, and I'm married to a doctor and I work now in the NHS, and I've been working with people losing weight and managing diabetes now for nearly 20 years. When you apply the ketogenic diet in its full glory, the results are very, very fast. And I've rarely seen people who can put up with it for at least 3 or 4 days, not, keep going when they see that change. So I do sometimes think, even in public health, there is an opportunity for something more focused and more hardcore to help people move away from the current unhealthy diet that we have, as you say, throughout our supermarkets, the unhealthy environment that we live in. So I've seen, and if you go to a big study in America by Verta, they've had 70% success reversing diabetes within 1 year, and it only goes down to 65% after 2 years. And that is a hardcore change. That is a no-nonsense, strip your body change. So I wonder if more people couldn't do it.
Yes, I can. I think I may have mentioned to you. I certainly have spoken on this for, throughout our social media channels. The way that I discovered really the impact that sugar was having on my body was to go sugar-free, and really to go on I would say virtually a keto diet, but certainly a very low GI diet, and which I've been on now on and off. I would say mostly on for the last nearly 3.5 years, and it's been life-changing for me, to the point I suffer from an autoimmune condition, so a very inflammatory condition affecting all my organ systems, systemic lupus, and just be able to reduce my sugar intake to a very minimal. Every now and then I will allow myself to go somewhere.
You're human.
But it is not an everyday, occurrence. And by doing that, the side effect was actually that the waistline was reduced. But the first thing that I noticed was the inflammation was down.
Yeah.
And by getting rid of this high processed, high carbohydrate diet intake, and reducing things like white rice, which I am terribly addicted to. I love it. Thinking about it, I want to go and have a big plate of it and stick my face in it. I love it. But it spikes my blood sugar, and I can feel the highs and the lows and the crashes. So I know that it's not I love sweet stuff. I love sugar. I love all the sweet things, but I know that they don't love me back. So that was the beginning of my journey towards ditching sugar. And I did discover that this particular type of sugar replacement was very, very good for me. But I understand that in your work with your customers and clients, that you actually take out any type of sweetness. So how do you manage people's addiction to the sweet stuff? They want a bar of chocolate sometimes, Hannah. What do they do?
Well, do you know what? Actually, some of my clients will be busy adding sweeteners to things. So don't worry, they're not all Puritans like me. We try and just help them, try and encourage them to give it a go, And I would say 50% of them at the end of the first month will have given up the sweeteners, and 50% will be probably working with products like yours to try and help themselves manage it. And in the end, I absolutely agree with both of you. Different people have different needs. The one thing I would say is that the results of when you strip out all sugar, not sweeteners, and I'm going to bear with me, when you strip out all sugars, because the body's response is so fast in a beneficial way, that for me is the reason why I am doubtful about the current policies fundamentally working, because I do think if you take a little bit here and you take a little bit there, and I don't think there's a big enough dramatic difference to make those big changes that public health want to see, as in the reduction in obesity, the reduction in diabetes. So I think ultimately we're on the same page, whether you do it with sweeteners or without. What we need to do is see all the sugar strip, taking a bit here and a bit there. I fundamentally don't believe it's going to give the results that the public health wants.
So thank you, Hannah. I think you make some great points then. I mean, I think we are on the same page in terms of our passion to help the public reduce sugar, and part of our summit actually was dealing with diabetes. So we're really excited about the ways of thinking that we can create and the conversations we can create around what do we put on our tabletop sweeteners that we're all using? How can we get rid of sugar? How can we incrementally get rid of sugar? I think there is a place for that. But Hattie, tell me, why do you think in the UK where countries like Sweden have started to recommend, based on good sound scientific evidence, that looking at the more low carb strategy around optimal nutrition has certainly put that there as their kind of optimal nutritional advice. Why have the UK been so slow and still seeing fat? And I know you're very much involved in reducing saturated fat, but tell us where we are at with that, and where your charity sits on the issue of fat consumption as well, and why we are sort of still talking about a higher carbohydrate diet versus the lower carbohydrate diet that the scientific evidence sort of seems to be pointing towards.
Yeah, I think in public health, we can't really base public health recommendations on evidence that's pointing towards it. Needs to be a bit more robust than that. And certainly, with trans fats was a great example actually of a public health policy that really worked, and that would actually be a good model to use elsewhere. But yeah, I think one of the things that we say with the sugar reduction program, and it was kind of hidden in the small print really, is that we shouldn't, if sugar is reduced, we don't want to be replacing that with saturated fats, because that's what we've seen before, where you kind of can market a low sugar product and you've still got high levels of saturated fat in there. And I think there's evidence that saturated fat from different sources has a different, so looking at say dairy products compared to meat products can have different impacts on the way our body processes it. But we would very much be looking at reducing, as with sort of legislation that looks at products high in saturated fat, salt and sugar. So we are advocating for reductions in those it seems the wrong word when it comes to sugar, doesn't it? But those things in products, and that's still where the bulk of the evidence shows benefits of reductions in sugar and salt. Salt's actually, I know we're not talking about salt today, but we have swayed into saturated fat, which also isn't sugar related. Salt has some of the strongest evidence of impact on blood pressure and therefore sort of knock-on impacts on heart disease, stroke. There's very strong evidence there, and we've still not managed to get these mandatory targets. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. I agree. So in terms of the policies, you're really looking at the foods that you described there are the prepared foods that food manufacturers are making. So let's just say, I live in a part of Wales where there are lots of food manufacturing places nearby here in South Wales. And, from the sort of mum and pop businesses making ice creams and things like that, the kind of artisan businesses, to big manufacturing factories where they're making and processing a lot of foods. So if we were to talk to, manufacturers to try to mix them and bring them on board, how are they going to achieve making those foods palatable by removing the sugar? I believe there's an answer to that. Of course, I would say that because I'm a startup business, and we do believe we have a solution for that. But let's say, what would be the alternative that you would think would be viable for the fat side as well? So, making a cake. I know what I make cakes all the time, so I know what goes into a cake. Let's just say we got the eggs, the butter, or the oil, and in our case, we could replace the sugar. What else? So how are we going to replace the butter? What would your ideal be for replacing that and making that more palatable?
Yeah, so what we find in a lot of our surveys is that the same products, or products in the same category, so say if you looked at breakfast cereals, there's a huge variation within that category on levels of sugar, levels of salt, levels of saturated fat. So food manufacturers between them have already showed that demonstrates that those with the higher levels of sugar could easily reduce down to those with a lower level of sugar. So kind of the variation within those different products shows that we don't need sort of new research or new product development to kind of show that, if you've got, and actually it's quite often the retailer products as opposed to the sort of branded products that have lower levels of sugar and salt and saturated fat. That's a generalization, but that is what we tend to find. And it just shows that they could easily change their recipe to reduce the amount of sugar, because these products already exist on the market.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that and we advocate slightly different approach to Hannah, your, all or nothing kind of approach. But what we advocate for is those small reductions over time. And I think we've talked elsewhere around how our palates can adjust gradually. So to take the example of the salt targets, one target set 2 years later, that becomes more stringent. 2 years later, that becomes more stringent still. So those changes are made gradually over time. And consumers don't really notice it. You certainly notice if you take all the sugar out straight away. If you gradually reduce it over time, and this is an approach that's more a public health focused approach as opposed to an individual focused approach, our palates do adjust to that.
Yeah. I could certainly vouch for that. And I think one of the things, I don't know if either of you have noticed this, but over the last, I would say, decade or so, even maybe over the last 2 decades, buying a cake, let's say when you're out and about, the sugar content, and maybe perhaps because my palate has shifted as well, but it almost like burns your mouth, the amount of sugar in foods when you are going into a coffee house now and you buy a cake there, and you just think, how can anybody eat something so sweet? It's almost like treacly sweet. I can't remember the cakes being that sweet before. Have you seen that the sugar content has gone up over the past few decades in the recipes that you've studied?
Funnily enough, when I was talking about the sugar reduction program and the 3% reduction overall, some products have actually gone up in sugar content, which is mind-blowing as a result of a program. But yeah, the sugar content has gone up in some products. And also it's interesting that you mentioned cafes, or we call it out of home, but restaurants, cafes, pubs, takeaways. Those products sold in those situations do tend to be higher in sugar, higher in salt, and even more so than the products that are sold in the supermarkets. So we'd want to see these sugar targets covering not just retail manufactured products, but also products sold, takeaways, pubs, etc.
Yeah, great. So that I think I couldn't agree more with you. I think, the temptations that are out there, and Hannah, having been on ketogenic essentially diet for when you're out and about, the temptation initially, I mean, now it's less of a temptation. I can pretty much, resist now because I have other solutions. But the temptation when you're out and about is just, the stuff is everywhere. What do you advise in terms of managing those temptations when your customers are out and about?
Well, we obviously supply everything from muffins to cakes to cookies to all kinds of things. So they'll have one of our products in their bag or on the go. And obviously we're trying to expand our distribution at the moment to offer everybody the right to be able to buy a natural, no sugar, low carb keto product that doesn't have anything added to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why once you really rid your system, it becomes easier to resist. It really does, because you've broken this famous saying, I see cake and I get fat. Now, there was a really great study done, I believe in Israel, I might be wrong, it may be the States, where they actually did this, and they literally can show that when your eye sees something sweet, it will release insulin. Your body will go and release some insulin to prepare itself for what it is expecting to come. And so breaking this connection and breaking this sort of natural desire for something sweet driving you is the most important thing. But, I'm just living this, strange keto world, which is separate. It's increasingly, because of course, what I don't quite understand with the sugar lobby, which doesn't really affect you so much, but which I still, when I listen to people saying anti-fat, anti-sugar, anti-salt, what they don't seem to kind of grasp, which is, and I think David Unwin's talked about this, and I know you're interviewing him as well, is that when you eat starchy carbohydrates, they don't rot your teeth, but they do the same thing that sugar does in your body. There is no difference. Your body can't tell the difference between a teaspoon of sugar and basically the equivalent amount of flour or other starchy carbohydrates. So it always amazes me that we see, apart from the sweetness, which I totally get, and rotting your teeth, big difference there. What your body does with that sugar, albeit in a different form, is no different. It still will cause blood sugars to rise. It will still trigger an insulin response, and so forth. So it strikes me again as, from a public policy point of view, which is what we're talking about today really, is that there is an unbelievable naivety in saying, well, we're only going to focus on sugar, which is why in Sweden they think about low carb, which is why even America, even the ADHD, the big American Food Advisory Committee are beginning to have to accept that you can't treat sugar separate from starch. Ultimately, it is the same food, actually.
Thank you for that. I think there's certainly a very important points made there, and I mean I echo most of those. But Hattie, what would you say? I mean, we've got an opportunity here to really reach out to people, and we're very keen in our business as well to be engaging with groups where, you know, potentially for other businesses they're hard to engage. We've been doing grassroots work now for decades as a team, and so we're really, you know, really keen to reach out to those hard to reach communities. So this is an opportunity for you to speak with them and say, what would you like to be a takeaway from this session today in terms of policy, and what people can do to lobby government to make those changes in their life? You've got an opportunity to speak with those people today, Hattie. So what would you like for them to take away from this session from you?
Yeah, well, I think you said about lobbying the government, and that really would be my takeaway, because, well, personally and through Action on Sugar, our priority is working for the government to implement legislation so that the food environment, which is currently kind of toxic and filled with these very sugary products, we really need the government to take a lead on this. And, you know, whether it's contacting your MP, and that's actually a very good way, you know, if an MP gets enough from their constituents, enough interest and enough questions raised, then they will take an interest in it. And we do quite often, along with other health charities, you know, signing letters to get this interest for politicians. And the politicians have obviously been distracted, is that the right way of putting it? But, you know, we're hoping in September, where we will at least have a little bit of stability. I wouldn't want to be painting a positive picture of what's coming, but, you know, at least the MPs will be back. I would say to individuals, make sure that you're using your you know, your rights to raise issues like this with your MPs. We sometimes sort of say about the nannies, you know, we get criticisms of the nanny state and, you know, why is the government telling me what to eat? But at the minute, these big global food manufacturers are basically telling us what to eat. You know, they're the ones choosing the recipes, they're the ones putting food in the supermarkets where, you know, most of us shop. So yeah, I would say write to your MP and say, I'm demanding that food manufacturers make healthier products. We all deserve them. They shouldn't be just reserved for the few people that can afford or have the kitchen facilities to cook their own meals. We all deserve to have healthier food, and we need the government to rally the food industry into giving some interest to that.
Thank you. That is brilliant. And I think we will certainly encourage, we are going to be launching a campaign for Sugar-Free 2023. We really are keen, particularly, we can't understand as a business, but also as individuals, how we can be still allowing children in schools to have sugary treats for their desserts.
Absolutely.
This is a normal thing. Anybody that goes to any hospital across the UK, before when I was unwell, I've had surgeries, multiple surgeries, and been in hospital and being fed sugary foods 3 times a day for many weeks. at a time, and that's when I actually put on about 12 kilos after the time that I was very sedentary due to a very serious operation I had on one of my feet. And I was astounded to be fed sugary puddings in hospitals, but this is what people are eating in the time that they most need their health back. They're being fed sugary foods in hospital. So we believe very much that hospitals should not be a sugary environment where patients should not be subjected to this high-risk food group, and that our children should not be being fed spoon-fed sugar at school. It seems preposterous. I think we'll be looking back at this time in history in the future and thinking, what on earth were we doing at that time? So Hannah, over to you. What would you like to be a takeaway for the people that you've got an opportunity to speak to as part of this summit? What would you like them to take away from this session?
That sugar really isn't very good for you. And
I agree with that.
My starting point is, if you can get sugar out of your life, that is a very big start to a better health, wherever you are in your journey. So yeah, stop eating sugar. That's really where I'd start.
Start there. I think if we started there and we made that impact, and I was thinking, I'm a dreamer, and I was imagining to myself, what could we achieve if we got rid of 10% of the sugar of our children's diet, 20%, 30%, 40%, and I'm sure the statistics would be astounding if we were able to get rid of sugar from children's diets at school, just at school, not, we're not saying the rest. We can't be we can't be telling parents what we can be advising, but we have no control over what parents are feeding children that's at home. Yeah. But we do as a nation have an opportunity during the time that they're at school to give them no sugar. Imagine what we could do to our children's health if they weren't getting sugar at school. Imagine what we could do to our nation's health if patients in hospital were not getting sugary foods. Just those two things, what an amazing achievement we could have, and what results we could see in people's health just by doing those two things. So we are very passionate. We couldn't agree more with both of you. So we're going to be helping people to campaign. Hattie, thank you so much for letting us know about that. And we'll be posting any links and resources to Action and Sugar. And Hannah, we'll also invite you to do the same. If we would love to join with you in this passion project that we have all launched. We are, as a small business, in a very agile and responsive way, can say what we like about any given subject, which is great. It's very liberating to be able to do that.
I agree.
But at the same time, we can bring in voices such as yourselves that have been, very key in bringing this important message to the public, and to take those really to the grassroots of the people that most need to have that message delivered to them. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you today, and we hope that this is not the end, but the beginning of our working relationships, that we can keep in touch and that we can work together to help families and individuals ditch sugar for good, and to really make a massive improvement in their health just by doing that. And Hattie, perhaps even reducing harmful fats and salt for their diet too. We never know. You never know where this journey will take us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hattie, thank you to you, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
And Hannah, thank you so much. Hannah Sutter. I'm so sorry I mispronounced your name at the beginning. Hannah Sutter.
All right, please don't worry at all.
So much for having you, and we really hope that this will be a great start to our professional journeys together. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.